Hi there, Randy Green here. Let us continue. In the previous podcast on karma and dharma, laying the foundation, I gave a little bit of what we call historical context. And that is important when we talk about, because if I were just to go back into all these thought forms, like many others have, then it would just, as I studied in the theology, as well as the theosophy of Bailey, or the New Age material, the different types of teaching systems that arose from this, both within Denmark and beyond, and all the different concepts of it, then people quickly resume or take up the ancient thought forms and ancient ideas, and then go with the idea that life is a school. And that we live here so that we can elevate in different ways and forms, so we can ascend or we can achieve enlightenment, all depending on what teaching system that you look within. When we talk about Christianity and we talk about the ancient cultures, then it was this whole that they had one life, or they thought they had more lives. And it was all about getting a better position in the next life and not getting a worse position, because if you were one of the commoners or one of the slaves, it could barely get worse than that. But when we go into Jainism or some of the extreme levels, or the very, if we look at a spectrum, there are different variations of how you practice the path of life and how you practice kindness, loving kindness. You can go into the extreme of saying that I'm literally not treading on the soil itself. I learn to levitate, because if I put my foot on the ground, I might harm some living being, some microbial living. And we do not, with the 12 choices of living, as I have put here as well. Of course, we don't exploit other life forms to sustain our own physical form. We don't exploit other life forms energetically to sustain our own inner fields. We don't in any ways or forms cause harm to other living beings, unless, of course, we are in what we call principle 2, where we are allowed to defend ourselves, all depending on we're talking energetic attack or physical attack or mental attack or whatever we're dealing with. But there are different approaches to how you balance the energy following principle 2. What's the right manner? What's the right approach? What's the right amount of energy? What's the right way of excelling the mastery of energy in its correct position, so that you cause no harm, even though you are still being afflicted by someone else's ailment, someone else's negative energy, someone else's approach to you as a living being. So there are different ways we can transform that. So that goes with transform, transmute, and transcend. So there are different levels we can work with these things when we talk about life as a school. So if we do talk about life as a school, is it then the everyday living, is the wake up and go to work and become part of the base program constructions and concepts of what it means to be human? Or is it the understanding of the life expands and extend beyond the whatever we're seeing inside this reality? And that's the approach there, where we go and say, okay, what is the Dharma? What is Tao? What is philosophy? What are the higher order thought forms? What are the ideas of working with concepts beyond what is tangible and what we can sense and see and hear in front of us, that exceeds that goes beyond that? So the path of liberation is a combination. It is the understanding you are in physical form, but you're also energy. You are in, we know that from science as well. They tell us, yes, you have this body, but when we go down to the subparticle level, then it's the quantum flux field where nothing exists. Everything is possibilities and probabilities, wave patterns, sound patterns, wave patterns, particle patterns, sorry about that fluctuates in and out, vertical particles. There is huge space between the electrons and the nucleus of the atom. We have huge space out there that science don't know what is yet. They call it dark matter, dark energy, because they don't know what it is, but they can see it's there. It's some kind of network, it's some kind of thing. What is it? They don't know yet. So we have all of these kind of representations of illusion, representations of void, representation of nothingness in between something that is. And then we can go so abstract in our mental concepts that we can go into mental spin, where we begin to think about the void and of nothingness, and what is what exists and what does not exist, and what is the opposition of nothingness, the void in itself, that is the isness. So you go in between the isness and the complete void of everything that exists, and that's part of the practitioners. That's part of what I practiced when I that recall of my previous life as a practitioner of the path of liberation was the ability to go into the void and go into the isness and go into these two things. And if you ask me, what is an enlightenment? Enlightenment is when you master the energies of the void and understand that nothing really exists at all. Because it's the void. You have to be in the void to understand the void, and it has no words. Once you're in the void, it's a peculiar, and it can't even be said as an experience, because the experience in itself is a construct of mind. So you have a mind when you go into the void. So how do you go into the void without having an I? How do you go into the void without having an experience? So you don't have any constructs of mind, any constructs of ideas, any constructs of anything. You're not labeling it. You're not interpreting it. You're not trying to understand what is, because all of these are constructs of mind. So how do you go into the void and just, what should I put there? Because exist also goes with some kind of self-identification. I exist, as we know from Descartes. I exist, ergo I am. So this, or I think, cognitive ergo sum, I think, ergo I am. So that's that idea that leads to then I exist. That's the subtitle. That's why I got a little bit confused there. So that goes into, because I think, because I see, because I perceive, then I exist. Because I'm able to think, then I am an elevated being. So we can say the philosophers, they thought they were more than the rest of us because they were thinking, while the rest of us primitives, we were only feeling, right? So they made a kind of excellence out of only thinking. And we have that within some of the practitioners of the path as well. They get so mental. They get so mind. It's all about the mind. And it's not about the emotions. Going back to the question that the first practitioner, was he, delivering sayings to his students, or the ones that listen to him, because they were not even students, because students imply a teaching system, right? The word nerd catch up here, right? So we have these people, these living beings that were trying to find a way of existing without having an I, without actually trying to define what they were, but just observing life, being in the flux fields of existence, on the path of liberation, leading from the concepts of complete non-existent, no I, no nothing, into the extreme deconstruct, where whatever process that pops into mind is just another mind bug. It's just another mind exercise. It's what the mind comes up with to preserve itself, to have self-justification, as the mind is saying, I have a role in your life, so let me put all of these beautiful thought forms in your head, because then I exist. The mind is saying, then I exist, right? And then you shut down the mind and say, no, you do not exist. You are a construct of me. You are a mirror of me. You're a mirror of my processes of what I want to think about. And then you go into this whole kuruksha, as it's called in the Hindu teachings, where you battle your own feels, you battle your own mind, you battle your own emotions. And that's where I go in and say, well, in my experience, that these distortions feels to some degree actually has entity attached to them. So there's more to it than just battling feels that of your own construction, because there are things from the previous use of these fields in previous forms, in previous civilizations, that have exercised different forms of energetic rituals, energetic ways of being, energetic experiences, going so far back to before the hijacking 50,000 years ago, going back to earlier civilizations and their practices, going back to Atlantis, going back to the reseeding, going back to the previous cycles, going back to different civilizations with more advanced forms of technology, going into realms that are beyond our present day of concepts and understanding. All of that is part of who we are now. So that also ties into, if you are kind of get stuck in, I am this today, and you can say, well, Randy, in the previous podcast, you just said, let's get rid of all historical context. Yes. What is kind of the concepts of historical context? We need to understand what that is, so that when we do, examine the previous existences that these fields that we are composed of today have been part of in ancient cultures and ancient civilizations, then we understand these ancient civilizations as they were and not what we want them to be, because we want to romanticize them, because we can't bear the hardship and the harshness of these previous civilizations, because that was so brutal. just to put in a little bit, we have got some of the Roman, I forgot the English word for it, but some of the ones, the Roman Empire were divided under the Caesar, and then you had the nobility, you had the parliament, you had these different groups, but you also had the ones that were administering, you could call them the mayors in our modern day language, of the different jurisdictions. But they were, of course, appointed that, and they were part of the nobility. But they left behind text material. And one of them is boosting literally to another one that another mayor about how he was treating the Christians, that he would round up the Christians, he would then torture them extremely, so they were famished and they were hungry and they were wounded, and then he would sew them into animal skins. And he would then put these 5 or 4 Christians sewn into that animal skin full of blood and wounds and what have you into the arena, the gladiator arena, where he would then put in the lions and the bears and whatever and the wild dogs, and they would then tear the skin apart due to the smell of blood, and they would then chew up the Christians. So that was entertainment. Live entertainment, and people would come in and see that, and they would kind of, whoa, what have you. So no wonder that the Christians at that time period, under especially Nero, became the martyrs that were kind of, we're going into this extreme suffering because of the ideas of crucified Christ. So you can kind of connect this. Yes, Christ was crucified because of his beliefs and because he was the first that were to redeem us of our sins, and we are then walking in the footprint of what Christ did. So we become martyrs. So we are repeating what he did for the cause, for the kingdom of God. So we are doing the same thing. Again, creating this kind of not cognitive dissonance, but cognitive coherence, so that all of this suffering and all this pain makes sense. Because otherwise, if you are in that situation, you're being chewed, you've got a dog that chews your leg, a wild dog that chews your leg under excruciating pain. How are you going to deal with that unless you're kind of going into some still point where you just almost kind of float out of your body? You kind of disconnect. You do the split. You need to dissociate yourself from that physical form. And then at the same time, you have that, I'm doing this for the cause. I'm doing this so that I can be elevated, so I can sit on the right side of my God, as we're also seeing in other religious systems, that kind of you go into this act of doing something that is extreme because you want to gain a position in the kingdoms of heaven, right? And I say kingdoms because there are multiple, there are 7 heavens, as we know from St. Paul, and the Niburian ideas. And quite a lot of the Christian ideas are conflated with what I call the Baal teaching system. So that's another approach from how I see these things, or the Niburians. The Niburians we kind of had the Mesopotamians that were part of the Sumerians, the Anunnaki, and then we had the later groups that came in that were the Baals, and we also have the Mardukians that were also playing. Again, I said there are different variations of this. These are the different groups under the D10 collective. But when we talk about these things, the meaning of suffering, the meaning of why we're doing what we're doing, and we're having the practitioners that goes in between the void and the understanding of, and this is where we could say, if there is a strength in the practitioners of the path, then you can say, what is the strength? And the strength is there that you, at least as I recall it, and as I experienced it, and as I saw it when I was tortured to death, as this practitioner on the path in 1959, tortured to death by a Chinese soldier, which is very not likable and not nice. Recall, let me just put that way, the extreme torture I went under, and how I dissociated myself from the body in that moment, how I went into thinking about, should I go into the void or the isness in these two things? And I chose to go into the void, where I deconstructed myself entirely because of that ideology I had around these things, dissociating myself from the body and then taking everything I was into the void under that extreme pressure, and understanding, well, perhaps there is some kind of learning lesson here that I need to master. And how do I master this experience the best way, which is, from a psychological standpoint, completely understandable. Also, when we talk about people in the Nazi camps, which is some of the teachings which was a teaching system of thought that Viktor Frankl came up with. He saw that the ones that survived the Nazi camps were the ones that could find meaning in it. So when you go under these extreme things, you have different angles that you can work with this. If, for instance, if you are being kept hostage, you can align yourself with the one that is taking you under, that is controlling you and taking you hostage. The predator that's in front of you, try to appease the predator, try to level yourself out so you align with the predator, become what the predator wants you to become. Make good rapport, as it's called, create some kind of connection so that the predator will not hit you to the same degree as he would hit others or what have you. That's called the Stockholm syndrome. You begin to love the predator to try and avoid it from being so predatorious. So because love conquers all, right? So if you love that person, then that person must be wounded, and you come up with different explanations that allows you to love, to feel kindness to that person. But I would say in that situation, when we talk about the Buddhist monk, as in that situation, I was seeing him exactly what he was. I did not go into this whole loving kindness, approach, and he doesn't know what he's doing, as you know from the Gospels, when the Jesus character is hanging on the cross and being tortured to death. Just the Mel Gibson movie, The Passion of Christ, were one of the most profound movies I ever watched. From the moment, first and foremost, they spoke in Aramaic and in Latin. So because I had that schooling already, I did not understand verbatim, but I understood a lot of what's being said subconsciously. And the whole, that experience of being drawn into a movie with the ancient language, they were dressed in the way, and the whole scenario, I just cried from the moment the movie began to the end of the movie, and my t-shirt were dripping wet of tears. Because that was probably one of the most accurate accounts I've seen of the scenario. So that's The Passion of Christ. So it's a brutal, violent, extreme movie, and it's not something I would recommend for the meek and for the ones that are not capable of dealing with this extreme type of pain. But you can hear that my past lives has all been in extreme pain. Even the one I got of one of the 12 tribes in the original land of the 12 tribes that we now call America, right? I have that experience as well. They're also ending my life in an extreme way with torture and rape and killing and getting my arms torn off. All of these extremities that goes to the extreme ways that this civilization, this planet, the previous humans on this planet have treated each other. So when we talk about loving kindness and we go into today, it's easy, quote unquote, easy to practice loving kindness. We get annoyed with each other in the Western world, right? But if you were living in a society under these extreme measures of these extreme violence, of being a female constantly being raped or killed or taken for granted or only seen as a breeder, or males that were slaves and were in distress and were hungry and were tortured and were beaten up and were constantly being bullied or whatever, the communists did not have a good life. So for them, if you came back and traveled back in time and you were having the female that had been raped 5 or 6 times, if she went out during nighttime, she would for sure get raped, so she wouldn't. But she might actually be raped by her father or her brother. She would have grown up with having had already several degrees of sexual abuse. If she were lucky, she would get married. If she were lucky, she would get a good husband that wouldn't beat her, that wouldn't rape her, that wouldn't treat her like shit, that would actually take care of her. But the chances were few, right? So that's how females had it in the olden days. And males were either drunk most of the time, or they were violent, or they were predatorious, or they were trying to make up for what they experienced with the landlord that would beat them. Some of them were also abused sexually. Some of them were being used as sex slaves somewhere, what have you. So just put that in context. And then you travel back in time to these people and you say, or when I was lying at my end, as a Native American, I don't like that word, but it's easy for me to say it that way, than saying one of the members of one of the 12 tribes of the original land, of the original civilizations that were allowed to inhabit that land we now call America. That's a bit of a long sentence, right? So, but when I was there dying and looking up and feeling that, looking up to Wakantanga, looking up the eagle and say, you have completely, what's the point of this, right? And I would come and stand over a version of me there, bleeding, suffering, being gang raped, have my arm torn off, and all of the good stuff I've been trying to do would been taken from me, stripped from me. The ones I loved would been killed in front of me. And you would say, well, that's because life is a school. How do you think I would take that? Would I say, oh, you're so right. Okay, so if this is a school, what's the lesson here? And then we have the new age spiritual teaching systems to tell us, but that's because we go into this role play, as we know from Michael Newton. We go into this role play where we play the victims and the oppressors, and we learn from both sides, and then it all makes sense. Not really, because where are we today? Have we gotten any further? We say, yeah, compared to what you're saying, that then we definitely have. Have we? Are we not just containing in a different way, putting people into virtual reality where these predators lived out their thirst for constant killing and raping and abusing, what have you, in different types of video games or different types of movies or different types of belief systems or different types of constructs? Are females today on a greater position that they were back then? We might have a different story that runs, but aren't we still just breeders? Are we still not under the control of the other 50% of the human population, right? How far have the females got in their achievement of complete equality and equality and equalness with everything there is? Isn't it still a male-dominated society? How far has the male got into the whole more subtle understandings of what power they actually have, what power they actually exceed over others, gaslighting, manipulating, tricking, follow their impulses, creating certain thought forms to appease their need for sexual desire, their need for power, their need for whatever, or greed, always trying to justify the wrongful decisions, what have you. Females always trying to justify why their males are doing the wrongful decision, trying to come up with belief systems and thought forms that appease this. Stockholm syndrome again, right? But it is to the extreme. So you kind of say, well, right, that's too cynical for me. I'm off this one because that's too cynical. But is it? If life is a school, what grade are you in then? How do you think you're excelling right now? Look at yourself. Be honest, completely honest. How well are you doing the school of life? How well are you mastering paying your bills every month? How well are you mastering have the income that you need so you can pay your bills every month? How well are you mastering the nutrition part? How well you take care of your physical form? How well are you exercising as you should as a everyday living? How well are you taking care of other people when you have the self orientation, then you have the self towards others, as in how are you around other people? How are you always, practicing the best ways of approaching whoever's in front of you in a manner that always leads to the optimal outcome for both involved? How far are you in the understanding of taking care of reality? How much do we actually care about reality? Yes, I pick up the cigarette, what do you call it? I forgot the English word for, or litter or whatever people are tossing out there. I pick it up, or I try to make my home look nice, or I try to make my street look nice. I try to participate in my community and all these things that we are also doing. And that goes very far, and we should do. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying we should do, but what's the next step? How far can you then push it into the energetic understanding of not just being good inside the base program, so to speak, but also excel into understanding that these concepts of existence go beyond the tangible reality. It goes beyond, far beyond, into different civilizations, into different timelines, into different very advanced concepts of reality that most have not even embarked on. And not until they get there will they begin to understand, okay, life is not a school. It's a slave system. The history shows us that. What's the difference now than compared to centuries ago? Go back the last 12,000 years. The civilizations that have been there, what is so different today other than our ideas of it, right? The mental constructs. So, and this is not me asking all of you to go out and riot and tear down the walls or what have you. This is not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying that when we play with the new age idea that life is a school, we need to ask some pretty profound questions. If life is a school, how well compared to if that began 12,000 years ago and we have lived so many lives, I would say, well, either humanity is one of the stupidest races in the entirety of existences, or there's something else at play here. Just to put that one in, you will say, well, I'm not going on board on that one, right? But play with it. Why is it so offending to you if I say that? right? So this is where I create cognitive dissonance. I go in and I poke holes in the concepts you have made of why you are living the life that you are living, why you have got the position in life that you have got, why you are experiencing what you're experiencing. Many people today under the New Age programs, they say, oh, it's just karma, or it's just kind of, I kind of follow the signs of that one because it is an energetic warning or what have you. That's also part of it, that you learn to work with energy in that manner. But aren't we writing it off too quickly when we say it's just karma? Well, then I need to go and transform it. I need to go in and figure out what it is. And that's where I would say, yeah, then you're on track. Because if you just write it off and say it's just karma, then you're not really dealing with the incident that has arisen in front of you, not really observing the incident from not only a physical point of view, but also an energetic point of view. And you would then say, if I go in and envision my past lives, which can be constructs, they could be programs that are inserted into my field to level down my molecular state so it won't vibrate up to the original energy system that is sealed up and kept, and were sealed off, it's not anymore, but were sealed off and kept dormant by these insertions, interception programs that are linked to different quote unquote past lives, so that the original energy system would not ignite and begin to descend into this physical form, and by that reconfigure it to its original energetic composition to keep the 3 lower fields intact inside the recirculation programs. So that's how I would look at past lives. Going from that angle, instead of going into the psychological, emotional interpretation of life as a school, or the religious one where we go in and say, well, it's probably for a purpose to appease the gods or a position within the kingdoms of God or what have you, or go into the mental processes where we deconstruct everything, because at the end of the day, it is a deconstruction of thought forms, a deconstruction of perceptions, a deconstruction of what we perceive to be, because all there is how we perceive things. Is not what actually is, but what we put onto it, what we impose onto it. Everything that we look at is our constructions anyways. But if we go into the energetic understanding, this actually has a root somewhere. It actually has a root in some kind of energetic architecture. And then you say, well, then you begin to reconstruct what you just deconstructed. And that's because, as I said, you can say, well, then the whole idea of the gods as one of the 12 tribes, or the Wakantanga, the big spirit, then I would get disheartened because that extreme experience did not fit in to what I had made up as a healer, as a medicine woman. It didn't match what I had experienced so far, other than the white man was a bunch of, because they were white males that did it to me. And that whole kind of under the whole vision I had about that past life, the way I worked with it, the crying, the mourning of the loved one I had that were killed in front of me, the mourning of my loss of my, I had a wolf beside me that were killed as well, the mourning, the loss of my dignity, my integrity, as I was being raped and killed and slaughtered and tortured, or whatever, where you say, well, how do you get killed and tortured and slaughtered, right? But they kept beating me up after I was dead. I was elevating above my body, and saw how they treated it, and constantly they were not satisfied with what had just taken place. They continued long after my death. So in that, looking at that, that's so meaningless. It has no purpose at all. It makes no sense at all, these kind of experiences, whether it's programs or not, because it creates it shuts down my heart field. And if I pull it out of that context of human beingness that are treating each other that way, and push it into the understanding of an energy system that is to be kept sealed up, to be kept in a low state of energy configuration, by adding in these programs that are artificial and linked up to storyboards and stacks of different crystal discs that runs these programs connected to different alien groups that are keeping our reality field under a sort of control. Well, then it makes much more sense to me, but it's still a construct, right? It's still something I have experienced. It's still something I have seen as I expanded my awareness in a different different direction. Once I got out of the belief systems and the religious construction, the New Age, I went into the subconscious and my fears and all the levels that were there. And I worked my way through past lives, and I worked my way back, further back and further back, until I began to reach a different level of human history. And by that begin encountering different code streams and timelines with different levels of information on. That's where I got this with the different types of alien technology, which makes so much more sense to me. And at the same time, you also have in the book of Michael Newton, where you have these visitors that comes in and they go into that room where they're looking at screens. And we have what we now know from the alien agenda, the abductees, what they have experienced with screens and technology and mind manipulation, psychotronic warfare, these simulations and what have you. Then it suddenly begins to make sense, right? So how do we add that up with our concepts of deconstructing whatever processes that we have of fields? Well, you could say if as the Baylor material tried to patch it together and said the Buddhist teachings were about the etheric field, Christ were about the emotional field, and then we will have the next group of avatars or ascended masters or what have you, that actually they call it the avatar synthesis, I think it is, in the age of Aquarius, where it will not be a teacher, it will not be one person, it will actually be humanity that wakes up and then becomes the teachers of synergy, the teachers of correct merge between the three fields of what the Buddha taught or what Christ taught. And we will then master the mind field, and we will become the avatars of selves. We will become the ascended masters of selves. These are the master programs, right? So that's the idea of that one. So trying to put things together, which seems perhaps random and are in dissonance with each other and does not add up in any ways or forms. But if we try to create a line like pearls on a string and try to tie it together, then we have a new thought from a new belief system where we then are on a path of progression where we can say, well, then that makes sense. But when we talk about, again, if we say, well, all of these ideas, perhaps they were constructs as well as part of some kind of activation process of humanity, then we impose a belief on it as well. Then we create another construct. So we always create constructs. And that's some of the things when in the Buddhist monk death scene where I chose to go into the void was I chose not to create constructs about the situation. I chose not to try and make my oppressor, torturer, a better person than he was, because I saw what he was. I still see what he is energetically. And I knew that all hope was that was not a human. It had human form, but it was not human. So thereby there was no loving kindness to be put there. There were no mercy to be met. There were no situation at all that would appeal to the loving kindness approach, that would forgive them because he doesn't know what he was doing. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was engineered for the purpose. He was made for that purpose. There are some species on our planet that are of the worst kind ever. They were dumped here because nobody else wanted them. They were created as a type of galactic war soldier a long time ago. And they were dumped here because here they wear out in all weird sorts of scenarios, have got weird jurisdictions where they can do whatever they're doing as part of certain civilizations. So that's another approach to what is. So seeing what it actually was. And then I could say, well, should I then go into the full enlightenment isness in this extreme torture? And that would not feel right. That would feel like simply not the right approach. I cannot explain why, but going into complete light in that situation was the wrong type of energy in that situation. So the only thing that was left was the void, the complete deconstruction. For some kind of sense of, if I take this with me into the most beautiful thing there is, the isness, then how will that, what would that do to that? As a kind of responsibility feeling is my best guess, because how do you even conceptualize a life situation after hours and hours and hours of torture where you completely lose it? How do you go in and try to make a psychological interpretation of that experience? You can't, because at that point the body is gone into an extreme, as I said, out of body experience, not astrally, but it's called dissociation. You literally pull everything you are and distance yourself from what's happening because you can't be in it. You float above it. And by that, you're still connected to what's going on, but you have to dissociate yourself. And then you go into something else. You go into a different state of mind, which we also see with some kids that have gone under severe sexual abuse as children, or violent abuse or emotional abuse or whatever, that dissociate themselves. It's called a split, right? So with that, then what do we do with that split? And then in the mastery of that energy, knowing that I am doing a split and I can't do anything more for my body because it's on the hands of whoever and whatever that's going on there, but I can take care of my fields. I can make sure that they are not being reborn, that they are not being recirculated. And that's why I took it into the void to completely deconstruct, because whatever had happened to this form no longer had a purpose and a function inside reality. So you would say, well, if we again play with the school of life, would that not be the peak of mastery of life, that in the moment of death, you are actually capable of choosing not to recirculate? Would that be instead of doing the enlightenment into nirvana, that's the complete deconstruct, which we don't really know what is. Well, I actually have an idea of what it is, but it's not the same as it is what that is, because there are big scholastic discussions about what nirvana actually is, because it's never really explained. Or going into the complete isness of where you kind of float into the complete understanding. What is enlightenment? Again, we can discuss that. Is that the end of life, or is it the cessation of all existences? And I would say if you do that, if you go into the isness, then you reunite, and you say, oh, you reunite with the source, and you try to make other ideas of that one. And I would say, no, actually not, because the isness is part of this reality field. So reuniting with the isness is like, going back to the womb. You could say the womb and the void, if you want to go this way. So for me, if you ask me what is the entirety of enlightenment, and you say, well, you had a bit of a rough exit there, so therefore you interpret it via that exit that you had, instead of if I had sitting meditating under the Bodhi tree. But if I still envision myself meditating under the Bodhi tree and going into that state of the void, and then understand that everything I am ceased to exist, all past lives, everything, the constructs, the ideas, the perceptions, the interpretation, whatever I gain from it, whatever fluctuations that are going on, whatever I'm perceiving, whatever, because these are mental constructs from one end to another, and we can go in rings and try to define them in different ways, but the definition itself is a mental construct. It's a purpose of trying to find meaning in something that doesn't need to have a meaning. It just is. So that's the isness. It's not about its light. It's not about this. It's not about that. Going into the light is actually more like, yeah, I choose to go into the recirculation. No, thank you. I'm good. I'm not going into the light, right? I'm going the other way because I'm exiting. I'm going out into the void of total non-existence. And again, what is non-existent? Non-existence is a word, and you see how that one goes. So when we talk about the mental field, we can really go into word nerd spin-off that takes us absolutely nowhere. And that's one of the features. That's why the mental field actually has a spiral. The vibrational field has concentric circles that echoes out and creates effect. Whereas when we talk about the mental field, it's a spiral. So you need to know how to work with the spiral of mind, to decompose that spiral so you don't go into mental spin-off where you just, like the tail, or the snake that bites itself in the tail. Where's the beginning? Where's the end? What's the point of all of that spinning around, where you just keep deconstructing. And what you end up with will be the void, the emptiness between existences, the emptiness between everything there is, the emptiness. And what's emptiness? How can it be empty? Empty means that something must have been full. You see how it goes? You just gotta stop, because it's completely spin off, right? So that's the problem with the mind field. That's the problem with the mental processes. So, and I know I just completely took it in a different direction, but that's also important when we talk about the three lower fields, when we talk about life force that is grown, life force that is, when we talk about some of the teaching systems that are some of the sayings. If we had the Buddha, what was he telling the people that listened to him at the time how psychologically aware were these people that he was sharing his saying was. What could he say? How far could he push it? And if we take the accounts into take them face value, would say, well, he was sharing what he knew in a way so that most people would understand, similar as I'm doing here, using the concepts of my time, the psychological ideas, the religious ideas, the historical ideas, general science, neurobiology, what have you, trying to convey some ideas from where you will begin to look at your life. You will begin to say, okay, so apparently one of the greatest things I can learn is mindfulness. That is to go in and look at everything and observe it without actually trying to label it, without actually trying to conceptualize it. But at the same time, I also need to conceptualize it because that makes me move forward. That makes me go into a thought process. That makes me go into an emotional experience. That makes me go into perceiving life as something I'm actually part of. But you also need to be able to deconstruct and pull yourself out of that entanglement and said, while I was in it, it had that purpose. While I was in it, it made meaning for me. But now things are changing. Reality is changing. Things are changing around me. The path I'm on is now on its next level. So thereby I deconstruct and let go of what was because it no longer serves any purpose. So instead of saying it's all this or nothing, isness or the void or the womb and the void or something that is or isn't or me or not me or whatever, go into this spectrum where you can work with both and say sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not, sometimes I exist, sometimes I don't exist. Sometimes as you sleep and you're awake, do you exist when you sleep? Sometimes I think about processes, sometimes I don't think about processes. And I would say one of the greatest features of meditation practices is that you go in and you still that mind that wants to create explanations, that wants to create constructs, that wants to create answers to everything. Because as I just shown you here, the mind itself can just spiral off. And then it makes ideas of ideas of ideas of ideas. It's like this perpetuating machine that doesn't know how to stop. It creates rabbit holes all the time. It's of no real use. Science for science itself, books for books itself, ideas for ideas in themselves, concepts for concepts in themselves, constructs for constructs in themselves. That's what humans do. So meditation practice as in kind of learning to make the mind still, shutting down the mind and all of its endeavors to try and pull in more energy so it can kind of self-justify its existing as a thinking organ. Shut that all down, as well as the heart as a feeling organ, as in kind of need others so I can feel, I need others so I can love, I need others so I can do this, I need others so I can do that, where we're actually taking other people in our hostage, as our hostage for our needs, also shutting that down and seeing it as vibrational energy of giving, of loving kindness, of caring, of putting something profound out there that actually elevates the existence of other living beings, not because I love them, not because I need them to see that I love them, not because I need them to pay back to me because I love them, not because I want them at all to respond to what I'm doing, but because I'm choosing that point in life where instead of receiving, instead of always wanting to have, go into the opposition and say, in my giving, I receive because I receive by my giving, because what I receive is not from others. What I receive is something that is profoundly part of my heart field, profoundly part of the isness that goes in and amplifies what I am giving. The more I give, the more I get, but I don't get it from the outside. I don't get it from others. I get it from the core of who and what I am, because the true connection, the true love, the true aspiration, the true understanding of existence in itself is never the exterior. It's always who we are, the inner us, not the I, not the constructs of I, not the mental processes of I, not the ideas of who we are, not the labeling, not the whole classification, who are we, what are we, these kind of things, but that profound sense of existence, of isness that is in your heart field, that the moment you connect to that one, it does something very strange to your heart field. It makes it explode into this kind of complete wave pattern of light. a complete vibration that goes in and amplifies your entire energy system. And it is that kind of energy that just blasts out. It demands nothing in return. It asks of nothing, as St. Paul said. It does not want something to see it, hear it, feel it. It does not require anything in return. It just is. And then in the mental field, in the mindfulness and in the observance standpoint, in the meditation practice, where we shut all of these processes down and just create the still point of just there. I'm not even saying beingness, but just that still point of just clarity of this complete heart field that blasts out in these waves of light. And you then have the mind that just goes into this still point of complete non-existence. And you just experience without experiencing. You just see without see. You just hear without hear, because you are no longer having the eye that interprets. You go in and you experience without interpreting. You follow with what is in front of you without interpreting. You are observing mindfully, investigating without understanding, investigating without wanting to have the answers, investigating without creating the constructs of what you think it is, but you're literally just taking face value what is in front of you. That's part of the expanded awareness, where you amplify the light codes in your vibrational field so that you begin to rise up the content of a reality field. And that's where the mind field begins to have its purpose, because it is a decoder. It is an interpretation. It is a mechanism of labeling and categorizing and working with different forms of energies. But if we take that mechanism and put it into boxes and create constructs that we rigidly cling on to, then we lose the purpose of what the mind field is supposed to do. It's supposed to expand in and perceive, and by that connect to the different code streams of our reality, to the different holographic information systems of our reality, from where we get the downloads, from where we get the full picture of everything there is, from where we get the full pattern of what we are exploring, from where we use our heart field to amplify that. And the reason why we do that with the loving kindness is because once we get there, then what we will amplify will be for the highest good of the many, will be for the reconstruction of the reality field we are part of, will be for the true understanding of why we exist, not from a personal standpoint of security, not from a personal standpoint of achieving a better life, not from a purposeful understanding of, yeah, I'm doing this so that I live my life to the fullest, so I can say at the end of the day, I have completed my Dharma, which in that context is seen as a duty. But a duty is something you do reluctantly. Whereas when you go in the heart field vibration, you just expand that one out. You are doing it because that's the only way to do it. There are no other ways to do it. That's just it is, the isness. So that's the combination of the isness and the void from a different perspective that I will use here. It is not how I teach it in the progression sciences, because there I absolutely go in and make a lot of constructs, a lot of thought forms, because I'm making a teaching system. But you can at any point with these dynamics go in and deconstruct it and create your own, because progression means to develop what is necessary in that moment in time so you meet the criteria of the energies that are in front of you so you can transform, transmute, and transcend them. That would be my purpose and my idea of what Dharma is. And karma fits into that concept of then when you are not transforming, transmuting, and transcending, then you create distortion. So for me, the whole concept, in a way, I would let go of the idea of karma and I would then re-engineer it into the law of reciprocity. Because what you are energetically will be what you perceive. And what you perceive will then be what you need to transform and transmute and transcend. So it's not karma. It's not learning lessons. It is a mirror of who and what you are. So you use realities to see who you are. So that instead of not seeing things as they truly are and your own constructs and your own ideas and your own distortion, which you then interpret as karma from the point of victimization or kind of this is a punishment or whatever it is, you go in and see everything that is around me is a complete mirror of who and what I am. And then you begin to take responsibility of your existence and your energy system and everything that's happening to you. And that's a different type of mastery of life. So with these ideas presented here, I want to end this little 2-podcast series of karma and dharma. I will touch ground with it later on, but again, connected into a different process and different concepts. Thank you.